What's the creepiest thing you found in your backyard? My dad started digging holes big enough to stand in our backyard 3 weeks ago, and when I asked him about it, he refused to answer. He'd come home from his job at the insurance company, change into old clothes, and spend hours out there with a shovel, digging these random holes that he'd fill back in before coming inside covered in dirt and sweat. At first, I didn't think much about it because Dad had always been weird about yard work, going through phases where he'd obsess over some project for a few weeks, then abandon it completely. But this was different. He wasn't planting anything or building anything. He was digging holes, measuring distances from the fence with this old tape measure, then filling them back in and starting somewhere else. I woke up at 2 a.m. one night for water and saw the motion sensor light on in the backyard. Dad was out there in his boxers and a t-shirt, digging frantically like he was racing against time. I watched from the kitchen window as he dug down maybe 3 feet, felt around in the hole with his hands, then filled it back in and moved to another spot. When he came inside an hour later, he jumped when he saw me in the kitchen. Couldn't sleep, he said, washing his hands in the sink until the water ran clear. Why were you digging in the middle of the night? I asked. Thought I heard something, he said. Maybe a water pipe leaking. Go back to bed. But there was dirt under his fingernails for days, and he'd started locking his home office when he left for work, which he'd never done before. The holes kept appearing. Some were shallow, barely a foot deep. Others went down so far I couldn't see the bottom from my bedroom window. He'd moved from the back corner of the yard toward the house, creating this weird pattern that made no sense. When I offered to help, he said no so quickly and firmly that it actually hurt my feelings. I'm just trying to fix something, he said. Old property stuff from before we moved here. Nothing interesting. We'd lived in this house for 10 years. Whatever he was looking for had been there the whole time. I started watching him more carefully. He'd pace the backyard before digging, looking at this old piece of paper he kept in his pocket. Sometimes he'd stand in one spot for minutes, just staring at the ground like he was trying to remember something. Once I saw him crying while he dug, tears running down his face as he threw dirt over his shoulder. Is everything okay? I asked him at dinner, and he looked at me with these exhausted eyes. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, he said, then laughed like he'd made a joke, but it wasn't funny, and we both knew it. I waited until he left for work on Tuesday, and then went to his office. The door was locked, but I knew where he hid the spare key, inside the fake rock by the front door that he'd used for the office ever since Mom left. His desk was covered in old photographs of the house from before we lived there, printed from some real estate website. In the photos, the backyard looked different. There was a sandbox in the corner where Dad had been digging most frantically, a swing set where he dug last week. I decided I had to know what was going on, so I went to the garage and grabbed a shovel. Dad wouldn't be home for 4 hours. I started digging where the sandbox used to be, where Dad had dug the deepest holes. The ground was soft from all his digging, easy to move. I went down 2 feet, then 3, then 4. My arms were burning and I was covered in dirt, but I kept going. At 5 feet, I hit something hard. Not a rock or a pipe, but something wooden. I cleared the dirt away with my hands and found the corner of what looked like an old toy box, the kind made of plastic that looked like wood. It was cracked and faded, but still intact. I dug around it, clearing more dirt, my heart pounding so hard I felt sick. The box was maybe 3 feet long and 2 feet wide, kid-sized, the kind parents use to store toys in playrooms. The lid was held down with a bungee cord that had mostly rotted away. I pulled the cord off and it crumbled in my hands. I should have called someone, should have stopped right there, but I had to know what Dad had been looking for, what had made him cry while he dug in our backyard in the middle of the night. I lifted the lid and there it was, crammed in and folded in on itself, a human body. My dad had killed someone. He'd be home in 30 minutes. What would I say to him? Full story on the channel below.